Hey everybody, this is Eric Schweitzer from the Gamer.com editorial team, and I'm here with features lead Jade King to talk about her review of Dead Space. Jade, is Dead Space remaster, remake, or reimagining?
I don't, you know what? I don't know. It feels like they're marketing it as a remake, and it is, but also it's not Final Fantasy VII remake or anything like that. It is a very faithful modern adaptation of the game we all played in 2008.
Right. I want to talk about some of the key differences between this one and the original one. And you sent me like 3 hours of footage that I went through, and what one of the things I noticed first was just how much chatter there
Mm.
is. People are kind of always talking to you, and Isaac is always talking too.
He's a talky boy.
Yeah. Would did you find that added a lot, or did it ever become distracting?
So this was my initial fear going into it because when they said, "Oh, we're making Isaac talk for this one of the universal things about the first Dead Space is that aside from when you're being murdered or stamping on things, he doesn't say a word. He's very much spoken to. But from the opening parts of this game, Isaac is talking about like spending time with Nicole once he finds her and talking to his crewmates. And at first, I feared he's going to talk constantly, like Atreus in God of War Ragnarok or something like that. But it's more passive than I expected because largely throughout the entire campaign, Isaac will only really speak when spoken to, or if he's responding to an audio log that means something to him. It's quite contextual in a
Mhm.
way that I wasn't expecting it to be, especially because I kind of think that him speaking makes the story and the characters he meets stronger as a consequence, even if Isaac is still kind of a boring character.
Right. Are there any big changes to the story though?
Not really. I'd say it's more refined as opposed to redefined because it feels like this remake takes place and shares the canon of the two games we already have in the trilogy, like Dead Space 2 and 3. And it feels like Motive has looked at those games and sought to retrofit a lot of the narrative and the themes and the characters and so on into this first game. Like you'll find a lot of new audio logs or text logs which talk about unitology, like the religion that kind of like gives rise to the necromorphs. In this version of Dead Space, at least, it very much feels like they already played a much larger role in like humanity and the galaxy. Like there's a text log I found, for example, which talks about them being like one of the most common religions next to Christianity. Like they've adopted that mainstay in society. Like
Mm.
Isaac's mother was a unitologist that Nicole brought back from the brink, and his father was like a big businessman who abandoned him, and as a consequence, that's what got him into engineering and almost resenting this religion. And these are some cool small background details that the game feeds to you in quite a natural way, and as a consequence, like the narrative that was already there feels more interesting and has more substance.
The other thing I noticed watching all your footage is that you kind of just let the bullets fly and it never becomes an
Mm-hmm.
issue. And when I played this, I was a kid when the first one came out, but
Me too.
I have a pretty clear memory of like getting into a fight that I could not win because my health was too low, and then having to like backtrack through the station to find credits to buy some health before I could get back into that fight. And it felt like the original one had a very like survival horror Resident Evil
Yeah.
quality. But when I've been watching you play the new one, you're just like unloading on everyone, like going
I'm
full
a gamer, Eric. I
Call
just
of Duty on their asses.
there is. You you are both completely right. This feels easier than the original. At least for me. I played on hard. I only used the plasma cutter. Like I was going proper purist because I
Yeah.
wanted to get that trophy before New Game Plus. But even on hard, one of the things I noticed, especially in the early chapters, the majority of the containers you can just get in there, grab some ammo, reload. There's credits galore. And as you said, like as a consequence, you have enough ammo to just unload on necromorphs like no tomorrow, and it's quite funny because it makes Isaac feel almost like a super soldier. But conversely, there were also moments when I was running out of ammo and I was having to almost, especially because I'd limited myself to one weapon because I'm an idiot. There were
Mm.
moments where I'd walk into a big room, there'd be four necromorphs, and I immediately think, "Oh bugger, I need to get out of here." So I'd just be running circles around, like trying to find bins to throw at people or like sharp metal objects that I could use my kinesis on. But even with that said, I do think they've made it easier, or maybe it's because I'm older and I'm more familiar with the franchise. It felt like I was able to breeze through most of it.
Mm.
Because even some of the harder boss battles, like the Leviathan, or they've completely redefined that frustrating asteroid shooting sequence. It feels like they've toned it down considerably in a way that takes away from some of the survival horror aspects that make the first so good.
Yeah, it's interesting because like we tend to think of older games as harder than newer
Yeah.
games, and yet when we revisit Dead Space, it feels so much easier because we've played so many more of these kinds of games since then.
Yeah, because you are right. Because Dead Space was like building on what Resident Evil 4 and Gears of War did. I suppose in 2008 it was still quite fresh, but now it isn't, I guess.
Yeah, and I'm curious how it feels as like a modernized interpretation because like obviously the particle effects are really impressive.
Mm.
The sound design is so much more involved than the original one was, but did you feel like you were playing a an old game? Was there something dated about Dead Space while you were playing it?
I don't think so. I think I played the original back when the pandemic started. I kind of
Hmm.
went through Dead Space 1, 2, and 3 on the Xbox One X. And even back then, I was kind of surprised how well these games have aged, both in terms of like pacing, level design, character work. It was very much ahead of its time in 2008 for a lot of reasons. And I think, like, as a consequence, this remake fits in 2023 really nicely. And it very much helps that Dead Space has always been like a pastiche of like classic sci-fi anyway. It's just like Aliens, Event Horizon, and like The Thing stitched together. And for that reason, it feels a bit timeless. And they've done enough nipping and tucking to some of the like mechanics and enemy behavior to make it feel like incredibly modern. Like if I put this up against something like Gears 5 or whatever that came out recently, like this feels like far more like new and innovative than that did. Like and it did back then, I think.
Right. Man, if you had asked me like in November, I would have said that Callisto Protocol was going to totally eat Dead Space's
Me too.
lunch and
I
this
had
was going to
that
come out
feeling.
and feel like super old and boring, but it turns out to be the exact opposite. Why do you think that is?
I think when the Callisto Protocol was revealed, there was a lot of hype behind it because like Glenn Schofield was involved, and we hadn't had a game like Dead Space in so long. There was the feeling that survival horror's back. It's going to be like pure and gory and like what we really want from this genre. But I think the Callisto Protocol tried so hard to be Dead Space and to like justify its own existence by copying that aesthetic and almost copying that tone. It failed to like carve out its own identity. So a lot of the other stuff it did, like its melee combat system, its characters, and often like its just design felt more outdated than like Dead Space does 15 years later. And this coming out, like I did talk about this to a couple of people. It felt so obvious that, well, to me, it felt more and more obvious how not bad the Callisto Protocol was, but how hard it was trying to imitate Dead Space and how much better this remake does than everything Callisto does.
I want to talk about this moment that we're seeing here because it's really fascinating to me. That I love the way you break the shelf and then turn the legs of it into spears.
I did this by accident, like this very specific moment, because I pressed the wrong button and I know I didn't have enough ammo to make it through this firefight. But then I realized, they've implemented some cool things where you can just break some stuff and turn them into weapons. I
Yeah,
don't know. It's been too long since I played the first one, like a few years now. So I can't remember if those sort of like environmental instances were a big part of the first one. but I found using kinesis and stasis to be like a far more valid mode of survival in this remake.
It's such a cool way to sort of ground yourself in the environment,
Mm.
and it feels like a very modern idea of like, oh, this is an object and it's made of pieces and you can like use these pieces. But then as soon as you hurl it at the little baby, it turns into this like jittering god trash of like broken physics.
I know.
And it's just like it's a moment where like, oh wow, games have come so far, and at the
And
same
it's
time
like,
like,
oh,
wow,
never
games have a long
mind.
way to go. Yeah.
Because there's a lot more like just random objects scattered throughout the room that interact with the kinesis and stasis now. So when I've run out of ammo, I've just been hurling like bins and wheelchairs and bags at enemies, like just trying to
Yeah.
stop them. And it does work. Or you'll find fire extinguishers on the wall when you're out of stasis, and those will also slow enemies down by like freezing them because of the low temperature and the high velocity. I'm not sure if they're completely new in the remake, but the way they've made them stand out visually kind of alters up your gameplay style a little bit.
How is the whole like gravity boot magnetic thing handled in this? Because I always thought that was kind of a low point of the original one.
No, because you had to like awkwardly point the camera and press the shoulder buttons to almost like
Right.
soar into the sky. It's much better here. They've almost enhanced how zero G worked in Dead Space 2 and 3. You press two shoulder buttons in like a zero G environment, and Isaac has some cool little rocket boots on his feet, and you can just explore the environment completely freeform, which turns big puzzles like the one you're seeing now, where you're this was much smaller scale in the original, but now the entire bottom opens up and you are able to fly around and defeat enemies that way, or gather secrets or treasure that previously you'd have to awkwardly walk over to and probably get murdered in the process. And this also lends itself to some altered level design, because loading screens are gone and the Ishimura, oh, I just died, the Ishimura is completely connected now, which leads to some really cool like backtracking or almost Metroidvania-esque exploration and rewards.
Yeah, you just died there and kind of like turned into a puff of red smoke. And I was looking for other death animations, but you never really died
I'm
much
too
in your
good
playthrough.
because it's very. I did. The only times I died was when I accidentally walked into like environmental hazards or like insta kill enemies who I didn't know were going to kill me.
Hmm.
Because I was thinking when I was capturing footage, I was like, Dead Space is all about the deaths, but I'm not dying. Like maybe I should
Yeah,
die on purpose. I'm just fucking smoking all these fools. It's funny.
and this was on hard.
Yes, this is all on hard. My playthrough. Just look at me go, Aaron.
Yeah, just tearing through them. I am really impressed by the like real time cinematic moments, like we just saw the ship
Yeah,
exploding and the big like turbine thing starting up. Um, all that stuff looks like it's done really well, right?
yeah. Because like back when Dead Space came out in 2008, one of the things it did so well was there wasn't a HUD. It was just everything you need to see is displayed in real time, either on Isaac or around him, and they've doubled that down to a T here because it's not quite what that God of War does with like the one shot mentality, but it's close. And like moments like this when you find the captain's body and you have to steal his rig, they've upgraded the cinematics significantly. Where I think previously you just saw him get infected and had to fight him. Here it turns into like a really visceral, gross moment with some extra context. And there's a few like story moments like that which I won't spoil, which like really add to like the horror and the atmosphere.
Yeah, that transition there from the cutscene to the gameplay was really well done.
Yeah,
And I noticed both times I've watched this now, the way that you start to shoot at his leg and it like tears away from his pants and tears the
the
flesh off, and it's
peeling,
just a bone left there.
the peeling system. I think that's what they called it, which is gross.
Yeah, super gross. It's the most important thing about this remake was that it captured the tone, I think, of the
Yeah.
original, and
Oh
it seems like it really does that.
no, this feels like I'm playing Dead Space again, to the point where I almost had to double back on myself and ask, is this level design the same? Because it certainly feels the same, and then going back to compare, it totally was. Because Dead Space has always been quite a timeless game, which made a remake scary to even think about. But to me, I think they've pulled it off like incredibly well.
What's your score?
4 out of 5.
You can find the full review link down in the description. That's going to do it for us. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell, and visit us at thegamer.com. That's the gamer, no spaces.